5 of us. Do I have that right, Susan? We've got.
Yes.
Okay. I think I'll go ahead and start then. Good evening, everyone. I'm Deborah Lockwood, Chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. Today is August 16th, 2023, and tonight's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. Clerk Aguilar, may we please have the roll call?
Yes. Commissioner Fry.
Present.
Commissioner Havner will be absent tonight. Commissioner Kaiser. Commissioner Milliman. Looks like she's not on yet. Commissioner Maury Bidu.
Present.
Commissioner Podar. Looks like she's not present at this time. Commissioner Will.
Present.
Vice Chair Dye.
Present.
And Chair Lockwood.
Present.
Okay. Looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 6 PC members present. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the director's report. And Ms. Wardell.
Thank you. My name is Erin Wardell. I'm the Planning and Development Services Manager for Washington County, and I will be giving the director's report. It has been 2 months since our last meeting. We were talking about that a little bit when just a few of us were on the call. So it has been a while. It's great to see everybody again. Couple of updates for this evening. On July 18th, the board adopted the planning work program, which your planning commission had the opportunity to review. If you're interested in the final version, it is available on our website. There were no substantial changes from what we had reviewed and planned on doing. We are working on a proposed minor amendments ordinance to the transportation system plan that we intend to file by the end of September. This will include some amendments to maps for functional classifications, lane numbers, bike, pedestrian, transit treatment, consistent with changes that have been made by cities in their transportation system plans. The county's transportation system plan is intended to be consistent with the city's plans. So we're making those changes to keep that consistency. We'll also be doing some amendments, including adopting the preferred alignment for the Council Creek Regional Trail. So we've talked a little bit about the other ordinances you'll be hearing in the near future, and so this will be the next one that comes up. Another update is that we have prepared 3 grant applications from the state to do housing planning related work, and this will be supporting some of the housing tasks within our adopted work program. We intend to do the Community Development Code assessment. We would also like to do development of some informational and promotional materials for middle housing and accessory dwelling units in order to help people develop those projects and understand county regulations. And then finally, near-term community development code revisions for facilitation of residential development. So we may not get all 3. We'll find out. We did prioritize them in that order. So if there's any question about how much funding is available or which grants we can receive, our real priority is the community development code assessment. So we're hoping to get all 3, but we really would like to get that one. And that will support us moving forward with our housing work. So for tonight's meeting, you will have a work session, which is a recap of Oregon's 2023 legislative session. We'll then move into our first hearing on ordinance number 897, which relates to Tigard's urban growth boundary expansion. We then have on the agenda for our upcoming PC meetings, for September 6th, depending on how the hearing goes this evening, we're holding time for a potential second hearing of Ordinance 897 if we need it. If we don't, staff are recommending that we cancel that meeting because we don't have any other substantive agenda items ready to go at that time. For the September 20th evening meeting, we will have a work session about the North Plains UGB expansion, and that will relate to the ordinance that you'll be hearing after that. For the October 4th meeting, we recommend canceling. And then later in October, we'll be busy with some of these other ordinances coming forward. Also, just a note, on September 19th, during the day, the Board of Commissioners will be receiving a work session on the North Plains UGB expansion. So you'll have that same work session item the next day, but if you're interested in what the board hears, that'll happen the day before. And that's all I have for this evening.
Thank you. Are there questions? I see Commissioner Morbido.
Ms. Wardell, would you mind repeating that date? Sorry, I missed it.
For the board work session?
Yeah.
It's on September 19th and it's a day meeting. And so their work session, well, it's hard to know what time it'll be scheduled, but oftentimes they're in the afternoon.
Thank you.
And that was on North Plains or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I had a question. For the CDC assessment grant that you've written, what is the scope of the grant? Is it for staffing or what is the purpose of it?
The purpose of this work is to do, well, so our community development code was largely adopted in 1986. And since then we have been making incremental changes to it and updates, particularly as we're required to by changes in state and other local policies. So we haven't really ever gone back and done a full assessment of our community development code. If you've had a chance to look at it, which I know some of you have professionally and some of you have as members of the Planning Commission, it's about this big. It's a really substantial code. When you have a code like that, it creates inherently barriers towards understanding it and being able to use it. And so what we really want to get out of this work is an understanding of where we can streamline that code in order to still accomplish the same goals, but make it a more manageable and modern document. There are a lot of changes in how people do planning from 1986. So we really would like that opportunity to do that comprehensive assessment. So this initial phase of work will be, I would call it a scoping exercise. So really an understanding from a third-party professional about what parts of our code could be updated. Once we've done that, we'll have an idea of what a larger effort needs to be, because that will involve community engagement and a lot of other pieces of work associated with it as well. So it's going to be a really big project, but we're pretty excited about it. And this will be a good opportunity to kick it off.
And just
Yeah.
a tiny bit to add to that, the grant is to pay for a consultant to help us work on it. So the grant won't fund staff time, but we will be putting staff time toward it.
Yeah, right. When I said that, I realized I wasn't saying it quite what I meant. Yeah. Outside person is going to be helping, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So our long range planning work program included staff time towards doing the CDC assessment. And then we need additional support and help to do that because we don't have enough resources internally. So the grant will allow us to do that.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. Ordell. Our next item is public communication. Has anyone signed up to speak to us tonight under public communication?
No one has signed up to give public communications. Would anyone in attendance like to communicate to the Planning Commission on not any non-agenda items? If so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. Seeing nobody, we can move on.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we have a work session, a legislative wrap-up for the 2023 session.
And Jessica Pels will give that presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Oh, Susan, are you sharing that for me? Or Chuck is?
Chuck is. Yeah.
No, Chuck is.
Gotcha. I was prepared to share. I wasn't sure. Well, hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Pels. I'm policy analyst for the Washington County Land Use and Transportation Department. And I was here in May, but it seems like there's a few new faces since I've been here. Back in May, we did a brief legislative update at a few bills that had already passed and then a few that were pending. And so this will be basically a recap of the two big bills that passed, a few others, and then a couple that didn't pass but are of interest and will likely come back because There was a lot of interest in them, and it's still a priority of the governor. So we'll talk about that. And then I'm going to hand it over to Teresa to talk about how the bills play into the work program for the planning division. Next slide, please. So we'll go through SB4, which you may have heard about in the news. That's the semiconductor bill, HB 2001. This one is a little bit confusing because there was a previous housing bill called HB 2001 a few years ago, and now there's a new HB 2001 housing bill. So we need some way to differentiate these. It's a little bit of a challenge. We'll also talk about Senate Bill 644. It has to do with rural accessory dwelling units. Senate Bill 1013 for rural areas to allow RVs as dwellings. Senate Bill 5506 appropriates funding for the climate friendly and equitable communities adoption. I know you're hearing a lot about that. And then of course our bill, House Bill 3197, which clarified that clear and objective standards for housing apply within the UGB, not everywhere. And then the ones that we'll talk about a little bit more that didn't pass but are interesting, Senate Bill 1096 and House Bill 3414. And these were a real push to streamline housing regulations to get more housing built, but that also have a lot of implications for the land use system. Next slide. So first we'll go through Senate Bill 4. This is modeled after a federal program, CHIPS Act, and it's creating helpful incentives to produce semiconductors. And so it created a fund to award grants and loans to businesses applying for federal semiconductor financial assistance from the state. And in return, businesses promise revenue generation or high wage permanent jobs. And then if they don't follow through with meeting these objectives, then they do have to pay back the funds. In addition, there were big land use implications with this because the bill specified that the governor can add land to an existing urban growth boundary to support semiconductor development. We have a few areas in Washington County that are eligible, and we'll show you a map in just a minute. But in general, the land needs to be contiguous to the existing UGB, not within urban or rural reserves, except a specified area near Hillsborough, in northwest part of Hillsborough. Because otherwise, as you know, rural reserves are very protected and not allowed to come into urban growth boundaries. So this is it was kind of a big deal, this superseding authority into rural reserve. And there's a maximum of 8 sites allowed statewide, 2 sites over 500 acres in size and 6 sites up to 500 acres. And so again, the governor will be looking statewide for good places that could support a semiconductor. Next slide. So this is showing the map of potential sites in Washington County. These maps are a little bit confusing, but it's because they are planning maps that were adopted as part of reports. So the map on the left, the 2011 Metro staff report, that was the Metro staff report about urban and rural reserves. And so when they write legislation, they often reference reports that were adopted, even if later changed. And so you have to go back to find this original report that was done and adopted by Metro Council. And so this is the map, and it's important because it designated areas by letters. So you can kind of see under where it just says Jackson School Road, that's area 8A, and then 8B is under the D. So it had a lot of designations on it. And then the map on the right with the stars on it is from HB 4078 from 2014. And that's what actually set the urban and rural reserves through the legislature. It was a little bit of a process where they took apart some things that Metro Council proposed and they changed it. So that's why this map has different colors, where the areas that are sort of bright green, those were changed into a rural reserve. The area in purple was added to the urban growth boundary, and the area in pink was added to the city. So the areas around North Plains, which you can see there on the north side of Highway 26 on the northwest part of the map. The yellow areas around North Plains are rural undesignated. So that means they're treated like rural land. They're neither urban reserve nor rural reserve. So for a city like Metro or North Plains, which is outside the Metro urban growth boundary, that's where they can look to expand their urban growth boundary. And so those areas are under consideration for SB4 semiconductor sites. And then the areas in Hillsborough, the green areas of rural reserve, are also under consideration for a semiconductor site because they were specifically left out, or they were specifically carved a space for those areas in the legislation. Next slide. Now onto the housing bill. This is a big housing bill. It establishes the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which is taking a look at needing housing units by income levels over a 20-year horizon. It will count current housing under production, housing units needed for homeless population, and housing units projected to be converted into vacation and second homes. And then the second part of it is it establishes housing production targets. So it will be setting expectations for jurisdictions to meet. This initial statewide analysis will be done by January 1st, 2025, but rulemaking is going to happen through 2024. And I know that our government affairs manager, Erin Doyle, is working on, she's on part of the rulemaking to address the urban unincorporated area. That's kind of a touchy part for us because as a county, we have urban unincorporated areas. And so the implication of this bill is that we would also have to participate in the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and establish housing production targets for us to meet within urban unincorporated areas. But I'm sure you can see that we might want the cities to take the bulk of the density and not have to have the county also have a housing production target for urban unincorporated areas that may someday be part of a city. So there's a lot of work being done behind the scenes on this one, and maybe we'll have Erin Doyle back at a different time to talk about the work that's ongoing with the rulemaking. Next slide. A few other adopted bills of interest. So SB 644, there was a previous provision in state law that only allowed rural accessory dwelling units if a statewide map of wildfire risk was adopted and could be consulted. However, that map was never approved. So people could never apply for a rural ADU because there was just no mechanism to do so. This bill fixed that provision, and it provides for rural ADUs in compliance with certain fire safety provisions of state building code. And I think Teresa will talk in a little bit that we might begin to see this sort of thing, where we might be doing some development code amendments geared toward it. And then Senate Bill 1013, this was a bill proposed by Clackamas County, provides that the county can allow rural homeowners to site one RV on their property for residential purposes. This bill is permissive, so counties don't have to do it, but we have the ability to do it if we want to. And so that is one that we may or may not take up. Senate Bill 3197, that was the bill that we proposed. It clarifies the intent that clear and objective standards for housing, that's a really big deal for residential development, but it clarifies that it only applies within the urban growth boundary. And that's important because it's hard to have clear and objective standards across the board for housing development in rural areas because of different lot sizes and different zoning, and there's a lot of other considerations that go into siting housing. And then Senate Bill 5506 appropriates funding to the Department of Land Conservation and Development to assist local governments with the climate friendly and equitable communities adoption. This is a huge deal. The rulemaking for CFEC is ongoing still, and LCDC, the Commission for DLCD, is expected to adopt some additional amendments to the rules this winter, I think in November or December. And so I think this is going to be an ongoing process to clarify the rules and figure out how they can be adopted and implemented at the local level. Next slide. Okay, now these two did not pass, but they are interesting, and they actually only failed by one vote. So they sort of languished. They kept working on these throughout the session, and actually they mashed them together into one bill, into House Bill 3414. So House Bill 3414 went through the committees and came out with a B engrossed version, which means it just went through all these different amendments that got adopted through committee. And so it sort of mashed the provisions of both. So the intent was to limit the ability of a local government to deny an application for a variance from land use regulations. And the idea was to streamline residential development. I think people are complaining that there's too many regulations. It's too expensive, takes too long to comply. And then there was also a provision in the bill to allow cities to add land to urban growth boundary for housing with some provisions for affordability and a few other things in there. So I think that we have heard that this is a priority of the governor's office, and I expect this to come back. And it probably some form of this will continue to come back until something is passed. Next slide, please. Well, now I'm going to pass it over to Teresa to talk about implications for the work program from all of this legislation.
Great, thanks, Jessica. So yeah, each year after the legislative sessions, we need to consider what we might need to change in our regulations to address the legislative changes. And we did have a good enough idea when we were doing our work program what things were looking like. So we did include some of these in the work program. Senate Bill 4, that's the semiconductor one. If the governor does end up bringing one or both or the other of the areas, North Plains or Hillsborough, into the urban growth boundary, there is work that we'll need to do to have a hearing on that and to reflect that in our plans. Senate Bill 654, the county rural accessory dwelling unit. We are hearing a lot from people in the rural area, a lot of interest in being able to do accessory dwelling units. So this is one that we have, we've talked about doing an issue paper, briefing the board and the planning commission on the possibility of rural accessory dwelling units, and probably moving forward with some regulations on that. On House Bill 2001, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, there is going to be a committee that talks about whether or not metro counties should be included in the requirements to do housing needs analyses and housing production strategies. Right now, we're not subject to it, but we do have a lot of housing and we do have a lot of areas that could provide more housing. So there is interest at the state level in having us be part of those requirements. So we'll know probably by the end of the year, or at least by the beginning of the next legislative session, whether we'll be pulled into that or not. And then finally, the HB 3197, the clear and objective standards limited to the urban growth boundary area. That one is going to help with our significant natural resources project in the short term. But it had two sections to it. The second section was that by the middle of 2025, some of the rural residential areas or regulations for housing in those areas also need to be clear and objective. And so we do need to review those and make any corrections to those, but we have a little bit more time. So parts of all of that you will be seeing over the next couple of years. We just wanted to let you know about that. And I think with that, that's the end of our presentation, and we can answer any questions. Oh, and Chair, you are muted.
Thank you. Questions? Not seeing any. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Peltz, and thank you, Ms. Cherniak. And I think we can move on. Our next item is we're going to address Ordinance 897. We'll have a staff presentation on that. To start, please.
Great, and Todd Borkowitz will give that presentation.
All right, here we are. So good evening, Chair Lockwood and PC members. As you know, I'm Todd Borkowitz, Associate Planner in Community Planning with the Department of Land Use and Transportation. So as you may recall, we had briefed you back on June 21st on 2 expansions to the urban growth boundary or UGB in Washington County. And today we'll be reviewing one of those expansions in Ordinance 897, which is the Metro UGB expansion for Tigard's River Terrace 2.0. And so here's a, excuse me, here's an outline of today's presentation. So I'll provide a brief overview of Metro's 2023 urban growth boundary land exchange that resulted in recent UGB expansion in Washington County to add River Terrace 2.0. Highlight the policy framework that prescribes what the county does after a Metro UGB expansion, and finally describe Ordinance 897 and its recommended provisions for transferring the new UGB expansion area into the urban area. And like last time, before I get too far into this presentation, I just again want to stress that the county's role in UGB expansion is really limited. In Oregon, UGB expansion is primarily a city-driven process that's done per well-defined state and metro rules. And counties primarily serve to help ensure that a city's vision for urbanization through UGB expansion can be achieved. So on that, let's move on to the next slide. So this shows the UGB land exchange, which resulted in Metro's UGB expansion in Washington County to add land known as River Terrace 2.0. Now, Metro was not statutorily required to comprehensively review the Metro UGB through its 6-year cycle until 2024. However, Tigard submitted a mid-cycle amendment proposal for 2 urban reserve areas, or URAs. Those were in River Terrace West and South, that comprise the River Terrace 2.0, and that area is shown here in green. Metro approved the expansion through a UGB land exchange, an action that required removing a comparable amount of land, of buildable land in Clackamas County from the Metro UGB that had not yet demonstrated readiness for development. Next slide, please. So the need for this ordinance is codified in regional and county policy framework. Title 11 of Metro's Urban Growth Management Functional Plan guides long-range planning for UGB expansions and prescribes interim protection for these areas until local comprehensive plan amendments for the areas are complete. At the county level, Policy 1 of the Rural Natural Resource Plan, or RNRP, requires that the UGB expansion area designations be transferred to the urban area. Policy 18 of the Comprehensive Framework Plan for the Urban Area, or CFP, requires application of the Future Development 20-Acre District, or FD20, be applied to all newly added urban land in order to protect and retain it for future urban density. And then CFP Policy 41 requires that new UGB expansions be added to the relevant community plan and that Goal 5 resources be retained. Lastly, Section 308 of the Community Development Code, or CDC, identifies uses allowed or prohibited in FD20, as well as dimensional requirements and other development standards. Next slide, please. So here is River Terrace 2.0. It's approximately 508 acres, 303 acres in River Terrace West and 205 acres in River Terrace South. Contains about 35 lots. So for this area, Tigard envisions a complete neighborhood with equitable housing opportunity, accessible parks and open space, diverse transportation options, supportive commercial services and employment opportunities, and the needed infrastructure to support development. And those are Tigard's words. Next slide, please. So Ordinance 897 makes changes to multiple comprehensive plan documents, including the Rural Natural Resource Plan, the Bull Mountain Community Plan, as well as the Western Slope sub area that's part of that plan, and the comprehensive framework plan for the urban area. Rural natural resource plan changes include removing designations for rural land uses and urban reserves, and then transferring the map Goal 5 resources. The Bull Mountain Community Plan changes include adding the FD20 land use designation and adding mapped significant natural resources and cultural resources, as well as adding a parking maximum designation. And then the primary change to the CFP is revising a map of future development areas in Policy 41. Next slide, please. So shown here, properties within the River Terrace 2.0 area currently have one of two rural land use designations, agriculture and forest 20-acre district, or AF20, and that's in the northern portion, the darker area, or exclusive farm use, or EFU, in the middle and southern portion of the URA. So to protect and retain land for future urban development until annexation to Tigard occurs, the comprehensive plan requires that the FD20 designation be applied to all land added to the Metro UGB through legislative amendment. And as the name implies for that district, the minimum lot area for FD20 is 20 acres in most instances. Next slide, please. So the FD20 land use designation that will be applied through this ordinance allows for farming to continue, but with some minor restrictions. It allows a detached dwelling unit and other development for a type 1 review. It allows daycare facilities and certain home occupations through a type 2 director's decision, and allows more certain intensive uses through a type 3 procedure. It also prohibits minor uses currently allowed in rural areas, including feedlots and recreational marijuana facilities. Next slide, please. So the staff recommends tonight that the PC conduct a public hearing and recommend approval of Ordinance 897 to the Board of Commissioners. Board work session on this ordinance is scheduled for September 26th. And the board ordinance hearings will start on October 3rd. Next slide. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do commissioners have questions? Commissioner Milliman.
What happens if we don't recommend approval? It just goes to the board and they make their own decision?
I can answer that, Todd, if you.
I'm happy to go ahead, yeah.
No, go ahead.
So if no action gets taken, that that decision will get presented to the board, but we do have a board hearing that we have noticed already that will have to occur. So we'll just inform the board that you didn't make a decision, and we'll provide a staff report explaining any deliberations that the Planning Commission had, communicating why the decision wasn't made.
This feels pretty administrative. Is that, I mean, it's like a decision that's been made that we get to participate in?
It is very administrative, but it is something that requires a public hearing.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. I liked it.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Will.
I have a similar question. Like, let's say the Board of Commissioners voted no. Would the land in the east side of the metro area stay in the urban growth boundary, or what would happen then?
The land is already within the urban growth boundary, just doesn't have an urban designation to it. So our comprehensive plan element requires that it be given that designation, a new land use designation, and that the Goal 5 resources be transferred over. But again, Metro, unlike what you're going to see for North Plains, Metro had made that decision on the UGB expansion already, and all appeals have been finalized, and so that is a done decision at this point.
Commissioner Will.
if passed and the property gets the FD20 designation, will it be like other areas that it'll sit and wait for like a master plan to get zoning, or what's its future? What's going to take in the future for it to go from FD20 to something where you'll see development?
The city, in this case, Tigard, would need to actually develop comprehensive planning for it, and that would need to be approved. And then from there, it's really up to, in this case, the city of Tigard on when and how much of that they want to annex. So it could sit there. We have many areas that have been designated FD20 for many years, and some areas get brought in and annexed by a city pretty quickly.
And what we have heard from Tigard is their intention is to move quickly. They do have a grant that's been approved from Metro to do the community planning. And so all of that is well underway.
Well, I have a couple questions. One is a pretty small one on the Bull Mountain plan, adding a parking maximum. I was wondering what that was about.
So that is something that we had previously, that we currently add to community plans. However, with new CFEC rules, we will likely not be allowed to continue to have that parking maximum. My understanding is that we will be removing that parking maximum designation from all community plans, likely at a later time once the CFEC rules are have gone through the appeals process and are finalized. But for right now, we're just doing our due diligence like we have before, in including that parking maximum designation until that time.
Okay.
And that is an existing map that shows areas that have that, and we're just adding this to that area.
Okay. And then my other question, maybe it would help to put up a slide, if you could put up 5 again.
Chuck, are you able to bring that up?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm looking at the, I guess it would be the east side of Roy Rogers Road. And there's areas that are clearly developed, and then there's areas that are open. They look like they're not developed. So I just wanted to check, are those areas already within the urban growth boundary? Yes.
They are. So on this map, you can't really see it that well, and I'm wondering if on a different map it shows better, but there is a brown line that goes along, it goes down Roy Rogers Road.
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah, it's faint on there, but that is the urban growth boundary. And
Okay.
then I know it's difficult to tell between in the gray on this map, but if you can, the white is urban area, which is inside the urban growth boundary. The gray is rural, which is outside of it.
Okay, so that would hold then for the other side of Roy Rogers Road, where there's a section that's white, but it's looks undeveloped, a little farther north. Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Oh, yes, Commissioner Moribito.
Thank you. I just want to apologize if you already addressed this. I had to step out for a minute. Wondering why is it a timing issue about for why we're deciding this rather than Tigard going through this exercise after the annexation?
This is an interim step that needs to be done before Tigard can continue on with annexing. Again, like Teresa said, we understand Tigard wants to annex relatively soon. We don't have any specific timelines for them. So we don't anticipate this really to be FD20 for very long, but that's really Tigard's decision. But it is something that we are required, that the application of FD20 as an interim holding district is something that we are both required to do by Metro and by our own comprehensive plan in order to really protect this land for future urban development.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Borkowitz, for the presentation. Now I'd like to open the public hearing. I think we have at least one person who wishes to testify tonight. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We ask that people start by saying their full name and location. We'll start with Andrea D'Amico.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Chair Lockwood and members of Washington County. My name is Andrea D'Amico, and I'm a member of the Stop 882 Alliance. Ordinance 897 has given the city of Tigard a great opportunity to plan River Terrace 2. And as they state, a neighborhood for everyone. While I feel Ordinance 882 has taken away from the city of Tigard's overall plan. Tigard talks about walking paths, bike trails, family parks, and safety. The tile flat road expansion would be a small piece of the west side bypass that doesn't go along with the River Terrace 2 or the neighborhood for everyone. It takes away from the parks and paths, making them unsafe and unusable for families. Tigard has stated that they do not need the tile flat road expansion, and their plans to extend Mountainside Way will be a better option for River Terrace 2. Ordinance 897 of City of Tigard's plans makes sense. Ordinance 882 does not make sense. And I just want to thank you for your time for me to express my concerns.
Thank you for testifying.
Would anyone in attendance like to communicate to the Planning Commission on Ordinance 897? If so, please indicate by raising your virtual hand. See nobody, we can move on.
Oh, thank you. All right, then I'll close the public hearing and open deliberation on Ordinance 897. Are there comments on this ordinance? Commissioner Will.
I understand that the city of Tigard will be responsible for deciding to annex this property into their city limits, and then development will occur under the city of Tigard rules. Does that mean that the transportation needs of any future development in the FD20 zone that will be created will be analyzed and regulated by the city of Tigard, or will the county have to look at transportation improvements to serve Tigard? How that work?
So that would be dependent on really the ownership of the roads. If it's a county road, the county would be involved with that. Local roads, the city of Tigard would be involved in.
But the city is the one that will be doing the planning for that, and the county will be involved with them in those planning efforts. So similar to when they did their concept planning, the county was involved with them and made comments and worked with them on the transportation system, the sort of draft transportation system. We would continue to be involved and, you know, consider the regional needs as well as the local needs.
And as part of that concept planning, there has been a traffic analysis that was done with the assumption of a full build out. And so that has been analyzed by the city already.
Are there any other questions or comments? Well, I'd like to comment briefly on the administrative aspect of this ordinance. These changes to the urban growth boundary have been approved by Metro and also by DLCD, Department of Land Use and Conservation. So our role tonight is to approve or not. The county staff adjusting 3 different plans that are in existence to reflect changes that have already been approved by other bodies. So it is an administrative task that we're given tonight. I've got that correct? Okay.
Well,
Do you want to comment?
Well, it's administrative, but it is a legislative action. It is changing the land use designations, and there is discretion here, but it's what we're recommending is based on existing county policy. This is what the county policy kind of directs that we do. But it is a legislative action that you're taking. So it's not,
Okay.
it's not an administrative action. It is.
Okay. Okay. So the Planning Commission, it's county policy that the Planning Commission act in this case. Is that my understanding?
It's county policy that when an area comes into the urban area from the rural area, that we sort of move it from our rural plans to our urban plans, and then give it these designations and make these changes. And we have to do that through an ordinance since we're changing land use designations. We're changing comprehensive plan elements. And an ordinance will always go through the Planning Commission and then go to the board.
Okay.
So I hope that helps.
Yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Kaiser.
Approval of
You-
ordinance
you-
number 897.
Pardon me, would you repeat that?
I move approval of ordinance 897.
All right, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Commissioner Will,
I would like to second that motion.
thank you. So we have a motion and a second to approve ordinance 897. Is there discussion? Commissioner Will,
I'd just like to say that I've driven on Roy Rogers Road quite a bit in the last decade, and I noticed some improvements that seemed like rural road improvements, and then now there's quite a bit of kind of urban road improvements, particularly near its intersection with Shoals Ferry Road. And as much as it pains to see a growth in that area, because I thought it looked kind of nice as a rural area, I see the pattern of growth, and I can see why this area has been designated to change to future development. I think Planning Commission's support of this ordinance is important, because with the kind of administrative type changes in the labeling of the zoning to FD20, it will help the property owners and any potential purchaser of those existing properties in their current shape prior to development to really be clear on the direction the land is going to. If the county did not take these steps and make these interim steps of labeling to FD20, it might be confusing for the public and for the property owners. So that's why I'm in support of this ordinance.
okay, thank you. Any other comments? So Mr. Bovet, would you recommend just raising hands, or should we take a roll call vote?
Roll call voice vote will be my preference. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. May we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Fry,
Aye, in favor.
Commissioner Kaiser,
Yes.
Commissioner Milliman,
No.
Commissioner Maury Bidu,
Yes.
Commissioner Podar. Oh, I didn't hear
mute.
that.
No, thank you.
Commissioner Will,
Yes.
Vice Chair Dye,
Yes.
Chair Lockwood,
Yes.
so it looks like we have a total of 7. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 yeses and 2 nos. So the motion does pass.
Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes. And this is the minutes of June 21st, 2023. Are there any corrections that anyone has to offer on these minutes? I'm seeing none. Without objection, the minutes for June 21, 2023 are approved as submitted. Next item on the agenda is Planning Commission announcements. Does anyone have anything they want to share with us tonight? I'm not seeing any hands up. Well, then we'll move on to our next item, our final item, which is adjournment. Is there any objection to adjourning? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you all.